coming here made me realize something. Half of what I'd been told was a complete and utter lie. The other half was a conveniently constructed lie.
Where's the truth then?
It's hidden in the lies.
Hi gang, and welcome to Redux Visions, where it's about keeping the Mediaverse connected from the past and present to the mainstream and obscure. Today we begin another journey into the realm of Hideo Kojima and the video game that took us to the past to make sense of the present and was constructed almost entirely of mainstream and obscure references. It's the 2004 PlayStation 2 gameplay tour de force, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Now I decided to make this video because when I started writing for an MGS3 project, I realized what was missing in my research that was so pivotal to making the MGS2 video. Sons of Liberty had the document of MGS2 and a making of documentary, but no such thing exists for MGS3, which I find extremely odd since it's the most popular entry in the franchise. So with the magic of the digital age, the gift of hindsight, and plenty of old interviews and articles, I thought I would continue MGS3's subsistence with my own document of, where we'll explore MGS3's dev cycle and its unsung key team members, while also discussing Snake Eater's revolutionary gameplay mechanics, quirky hijinks-filled Easter eggs, and the inspirations, both historical and cinematic, that drove the narrative for this survivalist odyssey. And of course, plenty of Hideo Kojima. This is also your spoiler warning for MGS3, along with partial spoilers to the movies From Russia with Love, Rambo 1 and 2, Running Man, and Apocalypse Now. If we're going to talk about Snake Eater's development, there's no better place to start than the aftermath of Metal Gear Solid 2's release and Kojima's claim that it would be his last Metal Gear Solid game. Throughout this project, I have really tried to embody that theme of passing knowledge on to the next generation. These guys all have great ideas. Hopefully they can take what I've passed on to them and blend it in with their own values to create a whole new kind of Metal Gear, created by them, not me. From this statement, it seems like Kojima was ready to just completely dip out after Sons of Liberty, but that's not necessarily the case. While his team was on well-deserved holiday post-MGS2's release, he had already begun coming up with the initial concepts for Snake Eater, namely that it would focus on survival, take place in the early 60s, and have a jungle setting. Once his team returned in early 2002, it was straight to work on Snake's next adventure. Now, there are quite a few interviews where Kojima says he handed the project off to his team, but had to take over due to development issues. However, an excerpt from a GameSpot interview during production shows he may have tried to hand it off, but nobody really wanted to take the ball and run with it. I really was not going to do this. After I finished MGS2, I came up with a game design for MGS3 and gave it to the team. I said, "Does anyone want to do it? Raise your hand." I was waiting for someone to say, "Hey, I'll do it," but no one came up. I was getting very irritated, but given the drastic change in game system with the jungle, I thought it was very risky to have someone else do it when we were changing things. So, I guess I have to do it myself. It looks like Kojima's idea of handing the game off was taking a 3-day weekend, then coming back to the office. But I understand why Kojima was frustrated, as he already had a pretty hefty slate of work during that 2001 to 2004 timeframe, working in various producing, writing, and game design roles on 5 other projects aside from Snake Eater in that time span. And he seemed to be aiming for more of a writing and producing credit for MGS3 rather than the full auteurism Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 required. The remake Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes probably serves as the best template for the role Kojima had in mind for himself in the Metal Gear Solid franchise heading forward. Twin Snakes used Kojima's original MGS1 script, he worked as a producer on the game, and had final say-so when it came to creative oversight. But directing duties were handed over to Japanese filmmaker Ryuhei Kitamura instead. But surprisingly, if you look at Kojima's career, he's largely worked in this type of producer and creative oversight role, usually birthing concepts that were taken over by other Konami staff with his creative supervision. Of his 31 game titles to be released since MGS1 in 1998, he's only donned the full slate of director, writer, game designer, and producer for 7 entries, which all happen to be the MGS titles and Death Stranding. So despite how many times he may have wanted to leave the franchise, there was something so dear about it to him he always felt compelled to come back and do everything. Though it was more death threats than love that forced him back to direct Metal Gear Solid 4. And the Welcome to Hell saga that is MGS-V's development is best left for when we do that game. But let's get back to Kojima being unable to get out of MGS3. In his quote, aside from nobody wanting the job, he also felt the need to helm the project for a reason that was becoming a common problem. His ambitions exceeded the gaming hardware available at the time. By his own admission, they had maxed out the PS2's capabilities with Sons of Liberty, which explains why Snake Eater was originally supposed to be a PS3 title. However, once Kojima and company found out the wait time for the new console, it was decided to move forward with creating Metal Gear Solid 3 for the PS2. While indoor environments were no problem, outdoor wilderness would be a different story, and this response from a 2004 PlayStation Magazine interview shows the difficulties faced when rendering this new jungle setting. First of all, just drawing the jungle graphically is very difficult and uses a lot of processing power. Next you have the up and down height of the ground, which makes things even harder because of the collision detection. It's easier to create flat surfaces with a perpendicular wall in games, but when you have these ups and downs, it's very difficult. Then when you create a jungle, you need trees, rocks, and things in the background, and in addition, every jungle has its own ecosystem. We have to add animals and plants along with the jungle's own mist, fog, clouds, and light particles coming through the leaves. You need all these effects in addition to everything else to do with the gameplay. What's difficult is that we have to maintain a balance. Even if there were many enemies around you, there are probably birds and snakes at the same time, but as everything has to be done at once with the PS2, you have to balance what you want to show, at what time, and with what level of detail. The array of environments that had been confirmed for the game, ranging from jungles and caves to mountains, outposts, and rivers, only exacerbated the hardware problem further, which led to the creation of a brand new collision engine and enhanced graphics engine, the process of which would take the better part of a year. And I love this quote from Kojima where even he seems to acknowledge how inconveniently ambitious his projects can be at times. What we have done here is really inefficient, but we've completely come up with a brand new engine to create the jungle environment for MGS3. That's why we've taken a year to come up with it. And again, we were doing that while we were creating Metal Gear Solid Substance. Development had begun in 2002, but it wouldn't be until 2003's E3 Expo that fans would get their first glimpse of Kojima and his team's labors. Much like the MGS2 reveal trailer, MGS3 once again blew the socks off of fans, but for a different reason. Kojima said it was much easier to impress people with MGS2 because nobody knew the PS2's true capabilities yet. But having seen that 3 years prior, they had to find a way to wow people that wasn't based on graphics, but instead on new innovative gameplay. The reveal trailer was extremely vague on story and setting, just letting you know that they'll be new, and acted more as a proof of concept trailer showcasing the jungle on their newly developed engine. Fans got to see the outdoor environments and how Snake would interact with the wilderness, hiding in the high grass, climbing trees, wading through water, and much more. It also showcased the options of stealth tactics versus free-flow open combat, which was also a new concept for the franchise. The one part that still rubbed fans the wrong way, though, was the trailer's refusal to announce exactly who our protagonist would be. Yes, he looks like Solid Snake, but the text says only the Snake is a true hero, but it doesn't confirm which Snake. And with 3 identical clone Snakes introduced in the previous 2 entries, you can understand fans' speculations and frustrations with evasive interview responses from Kojima like these. So Kojima-san, let's cut to the chase. Is it Big Boss in MGS3 or not? It's as you see in the trailer and demo. So, because we live in the age of the net, there are many theories flying about. One theory going around is that Snake is not actually Solid Snake, he's a clone of Big Boss. Would you elaborate on this theory? We'll leave it up to your imagination. There's been some speculation that the character seen in the E3 video was series mainstay Big Boss. Kojima comments, with a smile, that he's not sure if the character is Big Boss or someone else. We would of course eventually find out that MGS3's protagonist was in fact a young Big Boss. But the shenanigans of MGS2's marketing and these cryptic responses regarding 3's main character didn't exactly help build the hype for Snake Eater. Aside from a handful of interviews grilling Kojima about the game's new features, there wouldn't be a whole lot of earth-shattering news regarding Metal Gear Solid 3 until a more story-filled trailer a year later at E3 2004. This was the cinematic, storyline, breadcrumb-laden type of trailer fans had grown accustomed to from Sons of Liberty. It vastly expanded the game details and mechanics from the year prior with a more polished and finished look, but it also introduced us to MGS3's theme of scene and the Cold War implications surrounding our mission. Glimpses of new characters and lots of cryptic, existential, philosophical dialogue about patriotism and loyalty spouted throughout gave fans material they could really dig their teeth into for dissection and story speculation. And they did just that, spending the remaining months breaking down the trailer footage trying to figure out what it all meant. But there was also one major, non-story related speculation that remained with the game just 6 months away from release. Will there be a demo disc like Metal Gear Solid 2? Maybe. There might be a demo disc. And there would be, but unlike MGS2, which had the luxury of releasing 6 months prior to the full game and was bundled with an amazing Kojima Konami title in Zone of the Enders, Snake Eater's demo was released as part of the Jam-Pack Volume 11 demo disc in October 2004, just a month before Metal Gear Solid 3's full release. So not only was it distributed in a format fewer players invested in, but the time for word of mouth to spread about the new gameplay wasn't nearly the same as MGS2, which is kind of a big deal with the amount of new mechanics MGS3 was introducing. But despite the lack of demo hype this time around, excitement continued to grow as launch day approached, and it would be on November 17, 2004 that fans would get their first taste of Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. We'll come back to Metal Gear Solid 3's release and reception at the end of the video, but now that we have an overview of the game's hype and development, we can start looking in-depth at game details, along with dissecting the contributions and impact of MGS's lesser celebrated staff on not just this entry, but the entirety of the franchise. Obviously, when making a jungle survival game, you have to start with the jungle. But instead of importing a replica of one real-world jungle, Kojima and his team scouted various islands throughout Japan and forests in Canada that were known for their lush flora and fauna, drawing inspiration to create their own unique wildlife environment, with some locales remaining virtually unchanged in their video game adaptation. Places like the Yakushima Forest Bridge or the Amami Oshima Mangroves that would in turn become the Dolinovodno Bridge and the Saros River. And since the plants and animals in Snake Eater's fictional Russian jungle are a culmination of different regions, the game even includes a radio call that accounts for these inaccurate anomalies. The experimental environment, as Kojima called it, had shown his team's ability to nail the atmospheric jungle setting. But what about the actual survival aspects of gameplay? Which brings us to military advisor Motosada Mori, whose expertise would lead to some of Snake Eater's most beloved and innovative stealth and survival mechanics, along with the contribution that would completely change how combat served the series moving forward.
Snake, try to remember some of the basics of CQC.
Motosada Mori was the series' military advisor all the way from Metal Gear Solid 1 through 5. With each game, his main job was to examine the military tech and dialogue, offering input on authentic terminology, military equipment specs, and tactical procedures. While MGS1 dabbled with these elements, they would expand and gain more prevalence as the series progressed, which coincided with Mori taking on more active consulting roles during development of Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3. He had more input on gameplay and mechanics, which lent to the realistic military feel MGS offered to help immerse us into Kojima's crazy universe. It started with simple things in MGS2 like how Snake held his gun and the clearing procedures a team of soldiers would use in alert phase. And much like the office exercises orchestrated during MGS2's production, Mr. Mori took the development team on an overnight excursion in the mountains and woods to get them acquainted with the mindset of a jungle surviving soldier, showing them how camouflage works in the wilderness, teaching them the techniques of stalking, and demonstrating how people would really fight against one another. Which led to Mori's greatest gift to the franchise, the combat style known as CQC, or Close Quarters Combat, a fighting style Mori had learned 10 years previously as a SWAT instructor, and apparently one that's reserved for only the most skilled of combatants. Because when asked in an April 2004 interview with IGN what the advantage of CQC is over a regular knife or gun battle, Mori responds, "CQC is a high-level professional tactic. Only when you have mastered fighting with knives and guns does it become an advantageous tactic. Only special forces in the real world, and Snake in MGS3 who are amazing, can use this technique." And this advanced tactic was pivotal to Snake Eater's gameplay as an innovation that helped shift the series to a more action-oriented feel. Unlike previous entries that would force you to retreat and hide upon discovery, CQC allowed for a more forgiving and fluid playing experience. Even if discovered, you can easily CQC your way out of trouble at a moment's notice, sometimes even negating alerts in the process. But CQC wouldn't be the game changer it is if that was its only draw. Along with being able to slam enemy soldiers to the ground for sweet dreams, you can skulk behind to take them hostage, using them for human shields and performing knife-point interrogations for locations of weapons, items, and special one-time radio frequencies. Or just, end their life. It's fun for everyone, from the pacifist to the warmonger, becoming a mechanic so beloved it would be utilized in more intricate yet streamlined fashion in the following MGS games. But Mori's gameplay contributions and expertise added an immense level of depth and complexity to this new adventure. For myself and many fans who enjoy the Rambo survival elements and hand-to-hand combat of Metal Gear Solid 3, it's important to remember that despite Kojima coming up with the concept, that its implementation wouldn't have been possible without the true close quarters commando, Motosada Mori. Combat and camouflage would be just one piece of this immersive survival experience. And another major question to address would be how to sustain yourself in the great outdoors. A circumstance created, controlled, and solved through the new features of the stamina gauge and survival viewer. Unlike past entries that contain the life bar and occasionally an O2 or grip meter, Metal Gear Solid 3 introduced the stamina gauge, which slowly diminishes over time, forcing you to eventually hunt for food and sustenance. And a couple interesting functions of the new gauge when below the halfway point were Snake's stomach growling hilariously, and the effects of hunger on your vision and aim, making it imperative that you take care of yourself. And the home of MGS3's stamina management would be the new intricate menu system known as the Survival Viewer. This new menu allows you to eat food you've collected or captured in order to replenish your stamina, but this is also where you'd be able to equip a limited amount of weapons and items in your backpack, which are then accessible in-game. Still not being done with this feature, you're able to change your uniform and face camouflage using the camo index to determine your best options. And last but not least, the Survival Viewer is where you provide yourself some much needed medical attention to your wounds with the cure system. From rotten food to broken bones, MGS3 provides you with the tools to treat yourself and keep marching forward to your objective. This seamless introduction of so many new game elements showed the willingness to take risks, but also the mastery of game design involved. The depth of these new gameplay and menu implements could have been a very steep learning curve to newcomers and returning players, but were introduced in a smooth manner in part due to the order they were shown to us. I've always had these worries, especially introducing new game systems like camouflage, the food capturing, and the cure system. These things are totally new to the players, and I had to think of the right timing of when to give which game system to the player in the game, so that's something I had to think of. That's why in the game you can start out by changing your camo. The first enemies you see in the game are crocodiles. There are no human enemies. That's where you can try out your food capturing for the first time. After that, there are human enemies, so you can use your camo when there are humans around you. And after that, you don't even get to use the cure system. You don't get any severe injuries. Only after you enter Operation Snake Eater, then you get to treat yourself when you get injured severely. That's why we lay these things out separately early in the game, so that people can learn them one by one. Aside from introducing these more conspicuous mechanics, MGS3 also began the practice of injecting ridiculous amounts of hidden content through the core gameplay and narrative. Metal Gear Solid had done Easter eggs in small doses in 1 and 2, but Snake Eater was so packed with them, You could almost consider the entire game one big Easter egg. Snake Eater took the art form of hidden content to new heights. It wasn't just ghost photos or Raven dolls this time around. Everything, from cutscenes and radio calls to core gameplay and even boss fights, had something extra to unearth. A hidden area to access a special item, or preemptively destroying a chopper so you can avoid it later on. These hidden hijinks were added to increase replay value, but also for the purposes of immersion, consequence, strategy, and fun. For immersion, look no further than the new first-person cutscene option. We were able to use first-person for shooting, but never during cinematics. This new feature, only available during certain cutscenes, provides access to Snake's point of view, allowing for some very trippy and cool visual interactions throughout the game. It was a fascinating new way to put us in Snake's shoes, and one that would keep the players engaged during the infamously lengthy cutscenes. If you move on to core gameplay and consequential Easter eggs, the best example might be the one already given regarding the helicopter you encounter at Bolshoya Pass base early in your campaign. It's not told to you, but you can destroy the helicopter at this point, avoiding it patrolling the mountaintops later on. But by doing this, the chopper will be replaced by hover platform soldiers. And another example of this comes from one of the many ways you can defeat the boss, the End. There is an opportunity to kill him before his fight by sniping him sleeping in his wheelchair on a warehouse dock. Yes, ruthless. But when you take this option, his boss fight is then replaced by an elimination mode style encounter with the Ocelot unit. I think Kojima and his team did a phenomenal job of creating a feeling of choose your own adventure at these points, letting the player decide what type of experience they would have while staying on an unyielding path. It's a fine-tuned concept I like to call open world linearity. Building on this element, though, is where strategy comes into play, because what better way to win a war of attrition than destroying your enemy's food and weapon supply? MGS3 allows you to blow up food and weapon stores that will leave guards wandering on patrol, complaining of hunger, and low on ammo should you get yourself into a firefight. There was no stone left unturned when the team explored points to hide these features, and they even managed to slip the most fun and fascinating Easter egg of Snake Eater, and one of the best minigames ever, in your dreams. Shuyo Murata has been credited in Metal Gear Solid games under the titles of writer, game designer, and co-director. In fact, among all of Kojima's staff, Murata was seen as Hideo's likely successor. His work in MGS 1 through 3 was mostly confined to canonical side stories and game design, but he was eventually slated as the initial sole director of Metal Gear Solid 4, until circumstances dictated otherwise. But he did have one fairly mainstream title to his name, the 2003 Konami mech action sequel, Zone of the Enders Second Runner, which Murata wrote and directed, with Kojima's input as the producer with creative oversight. It was this collaborative effort on both the Zoe and MGS fronts that led to Murata's oddly celebrated unfinished creation, and one that's still being requested to relaunch to this day, the fan-favorite hidden hack-and-slash minigame demo called Guy Savage. If you've only played the HD version of Snake Eater, you may be unfamiliar with Guy Savage because it was only included in the original 2004 version and the 2005 Subsistence re-release on PlayStation 2. Guy Savage was meant to be a prototype for Zone of the Enders 3, also known as Anubis 2. This was confirmed in a 2011 Tokyo Game Show interview with Kojima, along with the discovery that reference to Zoe 3 was written into Guy Savage's working code. The game was so violent, though, to the point that test footage screenings wouldn't allow the audience to watch the graphic content, and only allowed them to listen to the footage. It gave off a sort of Devil May Cry vibe, but with the type of dark existential ideas Murata and Kojima are known for exploring. But in terms of brutality, how gruesome was this game really? Well, when you eviscerate enough monsters, you turn into a demon, at which point kills make it rain the blood of your enemies. It's quite the spectacle. But how players would access this gruesome game is part of what makes it so special. At one point during Operation Snake Eater, Snake is captured and thrown in a jail cell. If you call paramedic on your radio, Snake will ask her to tell him a story, where she gives him the heebie-jeebies by telling a vampire story. After the conversation, save and quit the game, and once you load your previous data, you'll be treated to the sepia-toned Guy Savage demo, which was given this color filter in order to obscure the on-screen violence, but the unfiltered footage can be found on YouTube. The project was unfortunately cancelled, and despite the demo's positive response, no word on Guy Savage resurrecting has taken place, and most likely won't with Murata no longer at Konami, having moved on to continue his work at Kojima Productions. There's never been a reason given to why the Guy Savage demo was included in MGS3. In fact, when Kojima was asked why the game was inserted into Snake Eater, he simply responded, "What game?" I personally think it has more to do with the mentor-student relationship between Kojima and Shuyo Murata, with Hideo really making an attempt to build up not just Murata, but the other MGS team members who worked on the Zoe and Guy Savage projects. It's a bummer we never got to see what a finished product would have looked like, because the brief stint you get to play is gloriously violent, fast-paced, with simple-to-learn controls, and satisfyingly addictive gameplay, to the extent that you're actually kind of disappointed when this nightmare ends. Guy Savage may not have had an impact on the Metal Gear Solid franchise, but Shuyo Murata and his work certainly did, and he deserves every bit of recognition, especially for this obscure, unfinished, but awesome concept game. Long live the Guy Savage. Since we've begun addressing Easter eggs triggered through radio interactions, let's go back to one surrounding the basics of CQC. As mentioned earlier, you can take guards hostage and interrogate them for secret intel, and one set of hidden radio channels contains music tracks known as the healing frequencies, which help Snake recover lost stamina when played. Fittingly, these tracks were composed by a man who now works in the industry as sound therapy, but who also happened to be the true mastermind behind most of Metal Gear Solid's amazing music. The vast majority of Metal Gear Solid 2 through 4's music is believed to be composed by Harry Gregson Williams, which is logical since his name was always the one billed in trailers for composing the soundtrack. But Gregson Williams was only responsible for composing the cutscene tracks and the memorable Sons of Liberty main theme. The man who actually created a large portion of the music for Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 was jazz musician and video game composer Norihiko Hibino. And despite working on the Metal Gear Solid franchise and being the sole composer for the Zoe series, his work largely went unrecognized until years later. In a 2008 interview with Electronic Gaming Monthly, Hibino revealed a lot about the music compositions for MGS 2 through 4 and the lack of credit given to him. Of course, it's been incredibly frustrating. The first year I was out on my own, I was kinda new. Nobody knew I'd created the music for Metal Gear Solid. Everyone thought all the music was done by Harry. With me, they were kinda like, "Who are you?" But because of Metal Gear Solid, I've learned a lot of things. I think now, almost 4 years later, I'm finally finding success. And he goes on about uncredited work as he discusses editing Gregson Williams' tracks for MGS4. I guess I'm the only one who can handle it of all Konami's employees because I started collaborating with him on MGS2, and even did a lot of secret work under the name of Harry. The actual total length of Harry's contributions were about 30 minutes or so, and I needed to compose the remaining several hours of music on my own for the previous MGS titles. In my opinion, I think this info is more an indictment of Kojima rather than Gregson Williams. With Kojima's obsession for film and want of being associated with Hollywood, he likely felt Williams' name in the credits offered more validity to the projects, but his title as sole composer was wrongfully used as a front. Williams' name was always touted in the trailers, but Hibino's never saw an E3 screen, and I think that is wrong considering he did most of the work. No shade being thrown here at Gregson Williams songs, he did a tremendous job of adding mood and atmosphere to MGS2 and 3's cutscenes. But Hibino's more free-form, frenetic-paced in-game tracks tend to be the ones fans enjoy most, and he really got to let his jazz lounge styling shine on Snake Eater's healing frequencies with some of the game's catchiest songs, including multiple renditions of the MGS theme, and my personal favorites, Pillow Talk and Sea Breeze. But Hibino's most recognizable piece is his collaboration with Cynthia Harrell on the James Bond-esque title theme, Snake Eater, which is one of the most celebrated and universal fan favorites. He would end up leaving Konami after MGS3, but would eventually return to work on MGS4's soundtrack as well. Currently he works in the sound therapy industry, continuing to soothe souls with his incredible music. And this section was meant to talk about the hidden healing frequency songs, but there's not much really to say about those, except that they're amazing. And I felt shining some light on Norihiko Hibino being the true musical genius Saxman of Metal Gear Solid was an Easter egg worth uncovering within this Easter egg. Before we move on to design concepts and narrative inspirations for Snake Eater, there's one final piece of the Easter egg puzzle to explore. There's very little in the way of information about Tomokazu Fukushima, but we do know a few things about his contributions to the MGS franchise. He was responsible for setting justification, essentially the how and why things are the way they are and why they're happening in places like Shadow Moses Island, the Big Shell, or a Russian jungle. But Fukushima's main contribution came in the form of writing. He had done the script for the non-canonical Ghost Fable and wrote Substance's Snake Tales. Above and beyond that, he was also responsible for all of the optional codec call dialogue in MGS 2 and 3. In Sons of Liberty, though, so much of the main story already took place through codec calls that Fukushima's work easily gets lost in the shuffle with Kojima's. But with a more traditional cinematic cutscene-based story and a new radio cast in Metal Gear Solid 3, Fukushima's insightful, witty, and personality-filled dialogue had a chance to shine. Yes, you have your mission commander and James Bond enthusiast Major Zero, but the more detailed characters are the down-to-earth tech-spec junkie Sigint, and the best radio companion of the entire series, the calm-demeanored, human National Geographic, ultimate movie buff, paramedic. In both of their cases, personality isn't presented to us through cutscene or even deep knowledge of their upbringing, but through Fukushima's decision to write about their hobbies. This is speculative, but I think these personalities were constructed from two people Fukushima knew well, Hideo Kojima and Motosada Mori. It's known that Otacon was Kojima's self-insert in Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 4. But in a game set 50 years before Otacon, where would Kojima fit in? Because neither of the scientists in Metal Gear Solid 3 embodied any of his playful, whimsical, movie-loving spirit. But Paramedic is everything Kojima. Her love of old-school movies, her belief in their abilities to help you escape reality, and the criticism of nitpicks unwilling to just go along for the ride seems oh so Hideo, making it no wonder why players enjoy calling Paramedic so much. It was like having a discussion on some of Kojima's favorite films with the man himself, and a strangely unique window to knowing him on a more personal level. As for Motosada Mori, it may not so much be his personality, but his expertise that was used to craft Sigint and the unending military tech knowledge he has. Something I would expect the series' military advisor to be well versed in. Fukushima's radio dialogue between Snake and Sigint is usually more on the informational side, but he uses Sigint as sort of a viewer surrogate and has him react to some of the more ridiculous elements of Snake Eater the way us the player probably would in the same circumstances.
Is there a way to take off my pants?
Say what?
My pants, can I?
Oh, hell no! This Fox unit is a nutfest!
I know this segment didn't reveal too much more about Fukushima as a person, and because everything regarding him is a mystery, even my analysis of his work is merely speculation. However, I don't think this theory seems outlandish to assume considering the amount of themselves Kojima and his team pour into these games. We may never know the full extent of Fukushima's work in the Metal Gear Solid franchise, but MGS 2 and 3 especially would not have been the same masterpieces of hyper-reality they are without his fun-filled dialectic contributions. Thank you Tomokazu Fukushima for everything we know you did, and for the things we think you did. On the subject of new characters though, let's shift from their personalities and conversations to how they look, by discussing series character and mech designer Yoji Shinkawa and his process for designing the characters of Snake Eater and throughout the Metal Gear Solid franchise. You can't talk about Metal Gear Solid without gushing about its mesmerizing, almost abstract-like artwork and the concepts brought to visual life by the artistic mind of Yoji Shinkawa. From cyborg ninjas and cowboys to astronauts and vampires, Shinkawa's gorgeous, minimalist, yet elegant designs have captured the eyes, minds, and hearts of Metal Gear fans over the years. Shinkawa art has become synonymous with the Kojima experience, because through these conceptual sketches and early ideas, without a single word, you have an understanding of the evolution of characters' looks and see how much purpose is put into these aesthetics. Shinkawa gave a bit of an idea of what working with Kojima is like in the Making of Metal Gear Solid 2 documentary.
美少年を出そうというのが出てきたんですけど、監督が美少年や美少年やって言ってなんか最初冗談かなと思ったんです。
But an excerpt from a 2004 IGN interview regarding Snake Eater's development gives a little more exposition on the process. Mr. Kojima gave me all these keywords, basically the emotions that soldiers feel in battle, like the fear, the fury, and all those, and I came up with some rough sketches. I also have an assistant, Ms. Uchiyama. We came up with ideas together and presented them to Mr. Kojima. we have to take a moment to mention Chiyoko Uchiyama, whose first effort in the franchise happened to be Snake Eater. She's worked alongside Shinkawa since then, usually adapting character designs to 3D model sheets, but also contributing quite a few conceptual designs over the span of MGS 3 through V, these just being a few examples. Uchiyama left Konami in 2015 in the Great Exodus and is continuing her work at Kojima Productions. But in a video shining light on lesser-known team members, I'd be remiss to not mention Miss Uchiyama's work.
You know what you're doing.
Kojima follows with, I basically come up with ideas for characters that would work in the gameplay, like a boss character that fights like this and hops around in this manner, and I present them to Mr. Shinkawa. Then Shinkawa comes up with the visual look of the bosses based on the ideas and the gameplay I require from these boss characters. For example, the Pain. I first came up with this character who controls bees and also has bees inside of him and spits out bees. I toss that to Shinkawa, and Shinkawa comes up with the visuals for this guy called the Pain, where he has this huge backpack on his butt so he looks like a queen bee. And then I get an idea from Shinkawa, and then I add on to that what kind of guy he would be. But these adapted visions don't just come out of the blue at times. The same way Metal Gear Solid weaves real-life events into its fictional narrative, a lot of these fictional characters are based on real people. Solid Snake's facial features in Metal Gear Solid 1 are said to be inspired by Christopher Walken, while his look in 2 and 3 leaned on Kurt Russell's Snake Plissken look. Vamp was inspired by a flamenco dancer, and Raiden was based on a young David Bowie. But moving on to Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake's familiar new look was a mixture of Snake Plissken, Rambo, and Robert De Niro's look in the 1978 film The Deer Hunter. The character of the boss was based on the 1960s art house film actress Charlotte Rampling, while the Sorrows design was based on actor Ed Harris. Eva's look, although not confirmed, has been rumored to be based on gravure model Chisako Morishita, and boobs. I mean, yes, this seems highly plausible when you look at their similar figures. But there's two character design inspirations I truly love, and both come from 1987 Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. There's the Fury, whose existential cosmonaut personality is a reference to David Bowie's Major Tom, but much of his look and features are borrowed from Jim Brown's character of Fireball in the film Running Man. And the Fear, whose entire environment and powers are an homage to the original Predator. All of these designs in Snake Eater and the whole series are a perfect example of Metal Gear Solid's never-ending, strangely cohesive universe of pop culture and film. But regardless of the inspiration, Shinkawa always turns out gorgeous work that continues to be gawked at with dropped jaws and blown minds. And his signature art style has become emblematic of the unique, iconic look and feel the Metal Gear Solid series and Kojima games have overall. Design concepts are just the tip of the iceberg though, because Metal Gear Solid's whole foundation was built on movies. Kojima's always worn his cinematic inspirations on his sleeve, but Metal Gear Solid 3 is what happens when the entire suit is made of inspirations. And let's take some time to focus on the three main films that influenced Snake Eater's overall experience.
You don't seem to want to accept the fact that you're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare. With a man who's the best. With guns, with knives, with his bare hands. A man who's been trained to ignore pain, ignore weather, to live off the land, to eat things and to make a billy goat puke. His job was to dispose of enemy personnel, to kill, period. Win by attrition. Well, Rambo was the best.
What better place to start than the godfather of jungle survival action, Rambo. That intro may have been the best way of showing Rambo's influence on Snake Eater, but there are some individual moments from Rambo 2 that make their way into MGS 3 as well. Of note, there's the Halo jump Snake performs at the beginning of the Virtuous mission, which played out almost exactly the same way for Rambo at the beginning of his jungle rescue mission, even losing his gear during the descent. But the absolute coolest and most obvious tribute to Rambo comes once you've acquired the M63 machine gun. When people think Rambo, this scene is normally the iconic image that comes to mind. And once Snake is toting this mother of a machine gun, he just can't help but let the enemies feel his fury. But fury wouldn't be the only emotion Snake would encounter on his jungle odyssey.
You smell that? Napalm, son! Nothing else in the world smells like that! I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
The 1979 Francis Ford Coppola masterpiece Apocalypse Now heavily inspired the narrative of MGS3 and the boss's Cobra unit. In the film, Captain Willard, played by Martin Sheen, is a CIA assassin sent on a mission in an enemy jungle in order to dispose of a renegade agent the US government fears is a threat to American ideals and ambitions. Much like Snake's assignment to eliminate his former mentor, the Boss, after her orchestrated defection to Volgan in Russia. Going a little deeper than that, through Snake Eater and Apocalypse Now, both main characters experience deep emotional changes along their journey that end up forming an emotional connection between them and their target. In terms of the emotions Snake faces, those take the form of this game's cadre of bosses, the Cobra unit, who are each named after emotions felt during battle. The pain, the fear, the end, the fury, the sorrow, and the joy. All of these characters' emotion-based names and their very theatrical deaths were inspired by Marlon Brando's iconic line, It's understandable that Rambo may get more name recognition as an action film influence, but Apocalypse Now's philosophical aspects and overall story cannot be ignored based on how much narrative and motivational impact they provide Snake Eater. But there still remains a film and franchise with the largest impact on Metal Gear Solid 3, and kinda the entire Metal Gear Solid saga. And it's none other than... There's absolutely no denying the Bond franchise has always had some influence on Metal Gear Solid, but Snake Eater is the real love letter to the suave 007 films. From the homage theme song Snake Eater, to Major Zero's obsession with the spy films and their gadgets, James Bond, and more specifically the second Bond adventure, From Russia with Love, has the biggest cinematic influence on Metal Gear Solid 3, including the more fantastical aspects like super sexy femme fatales, fancy gadgets, over-the-top villains, and disguises. Sifting through the production notes of MGS3, there is a section listed Connery Bond with this note attached. In Metal Gear 2, the character portrait of Big Boss was modeled after Sean Connery. This was one of the factors behind Kojima imagining a 007 theme for MGS3, because if the old Big Boss is the old Sean Connery, then the young Big Boss would be the young Sean Connery, and the young Connery is James Bond. Therefore, Naked Snake is James Bond. But a more direct character reference to From Russia with Love lies with the alias and motivations of Snake Eater's femme fatale, Eva, who not only has the alternate pseudonym of Tatiana as a tribute to Bond girl Tatiana Romanova, but Eva's motivations almost mirror hers as well. Both assigned to ensure the main character recovers the valued item and then use their seductive charms to lower the agent's guard and abscond with the asset and return it to her home country. But not before accidentally falling in love with our main hero. Other pieces like the Lecter Decoder or the Spectre assassin Red Grant, who seemingly helps Bond on his mission and actually acts in a chummy manner toward him, would be converted to the Philosopher's Legacy and the character of young Ocelot in MGS3 as well. One final piece of interesting connection between Bond and Kojima can be found in history. It's almost like all of this was fate the way it all falls into place, because there's a sort of mimetic bond, no pun intended, between Hideo Kojima and the Debonair spy franchise. Both were born the same year. Yes, Bond novels had been out for a while, but the first film in the series, Dr. No, released in June of 1963, just 2 months before Kojima was born. And I just find it to be such a cool coincidence that two pillars of the spy genre in both movies and games for decades to come were both brought to life in the same year. And staying with Kojima's birthday illuminates an interesting detail of how, despite wanting to celebrate its creator, MGS3's team was committed to continuity and hyper-reality. Originally, the date of Operation Snake Eater was set to take place on August 24, 1963, Hideo Kojima's birth date. but in order to incorporate the international tension-creating tragedy of President Kennedy's assassination that November, Operation Snake Eater would be set a year later, meshing with the series of events that would embroil us in the Vietnam War. These real events seamlessly woven in with Snake Eater's more absurd fantastical aspects are the culmination of Kojima's concepts, Fukushima's setting justification mastery, and Motosada Mori's military tech knowledge. Along with pop culture, the Metal Gear Solid series is known for weaving historical facts within its surreal narratives. But Snake Eater once again contains so much that it creates the sensation of hyperreality, which is defined as an inability of consciousness to distinguish reality from a simulation of reality, especially in technologically advanced postmodern societies. That description sounds more like the MGS2 VR theory and mimetic warfare, but this excerpt from a Gama Sutra article titled What MGS3 Teaches Us About Hyperreality will illuminate how this pertains to Snake Eater's narrative. And if this is a subject that interests you, I highly suggest checking out the full article, which is a really fascinating read, and it's linked in the description. Referencing so many real-life events consequently allows Kojima to intermingle and pass off fictional information as genuine real-world fact. Fictional information in Snake Eater is presented by the characters with the same amount of conviction as historical fact, and the two are often so interwoven that any effort in unraveling them becomes a considerable task. It's much easier and much more likely for gamers to accept the holistic experience of the game rather than deny the information contained therein. That's probably the best way to sum up how well history mixed into MGS3's story and how much effort was done to capture the early 60s spirit. And these quotes by Kojima shed a bit of light on how this time period rife with international tensions and Cold War espionage was perfect for Snake Eater. The game takes place in the 60s during the Cold War. You will see many things such as crazy over-the-top items and gadgets that the Americans and Soviets used to spy on each other. The game takes place in the summer of 1964, and in the previous year, 1963, that's when the Cuban Missile Crisis took place and when Kennedy was assassinated. This is a time when America started heading in a bad direction, right before the Vietnam War. I think that many historical events that happened at that time before Vietnam will be in the game. There won't be any part of the Vietnam War in there though. Let's actually go back to defining hyperrealism, because the first definition provided referred to hyperrealism in visual arts, but the literary definition will help me give some insight on MGS3's storytelling approach. Literary hyperrealism lacks opinion and biased description. It tells how things are happening through the course of the work rather than how the characters or author see things. This is a big deal, especially if you're familiar with Kojima and his writers who are known for putting so much of their personal philosophies and ideals into the plots of Metal Gear Solid games. Hell, Metal Gear Solid 2 acted as a masterclass in existentialism and reality perception, but it divided the fanbase, with half loving it and the other half feeling it being overly verbose and super pretentious. MGS3 does have a bit of philosophy and mysterious lore added to it, but it's not the crux of the narrative, with even Kojima acknowledging this in a PlayStation Magazine interview during Snake Eater's early development. The structure of Metal Gear Solid 3 will focus on the game's tempo and storytelling instead of the unfolding of mysteries and multiple twists. There will be less cinemas, and you won't simply be watching them. So from what we can gather, the intention was less cutscenes, less mysteries and twists, less of the author's opinion, more gameplay, a straightforward story, and using history for context. It can look like I'm saying MGS3's story isn't good from this list, but that's not the intent. The point is that MGS3 seemed to be determined to stray from the series' norm of self-indulgent, verbose exposition and grandstanding, offering us a more action-packed revisionist history spy story. This is speculative once again, but I do feel like this area is where Fukushima's impact was probably felt most in MGS3, because who better to handle the who, what, when, where, why, and how than the man responsible for setting justification. But this is also an area that Motosada Mori's expertise on military tech equipment was probably useful toward the design of the Shagohod and the hover platforms, with the former being derived from an old German World War II weapon called the Big Gun, and the latter coming from the Army's hover vehicle known as the Wasp. All these elements fused together in a perfect synergy is the best example of how Kojima and company take from their surroundings what is needed, making of it something more. But more than the purpose of discussing hyperreality in this video that's focused more on the individual contributions of staff members than the collective, I thought it would be nice to have a section that showed how all these creative and talented people whose talents and ideas are so different, were able to come together multiple times to give us some of the greatest video games ever created. And looking at how MGS3 merged its own elements with history was the best way to wrap up the history of MGS3's development. Before we conclude this document, let's jump back, or jump forward, I don't know. Let's revisit November 17th, 2004 and Snake Eater's release. MGS3 rocked the gaming world. Everyone expected it to be good, but I think after the fan backlash of Metal Gear Solid 2 and Kojima's somewhat evasive answers regarding Snake Eater, expectations were tempered a bit more for this release, which in turn made it that much more enjoyable. For myself, nothing tops MGS2 story-wise, but conversely, nothing tops MGS3 gameplay-wise, and fans are still gushing to this day about the amazing mechanics, fun-filled Easter eggs, and memorable characters. If someone asked you to pick one MGS game to play, most would say Snake Eater since its story is less convoluted and it's the peak of gameplay in the franchise. And it's actually the entry Kojima recommends players start with, not so much because of continuity, but because he states the controls are more modern than 1 and 2. But among all the resounding statements about Snake Eater being a masterpiece, this exchange during an interview with Kojima and Shinkawa post-release sums it up best. I always say when I come up with a new Metal Gear Solid game that it's a masterpiece, but this time I think we nailed it in terms of gameplay and in terms of volume as well because it's a big, long game. I think it's a masterpiece, and Yoji Shinkawa is a critic and his evaluations can be pretty severe, but this time he thinks it's a masterpiece as well. There you have it, from the big boss himself, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is a masterpiece. And aside from Metal Gear Solid 1, it's probably the most universally loved of the series. I honestly don't think I've ever even read one negative review about MGS3 in the 16 years it's been around, and that alone is a testament to its legacy as one of the best games ever made. It goes without saying, but Kojima, and more importantly his team, deserve recognition for the innovative risks, countless hours of work, and the never-ending hours of pure enjoyment they provided gamers over the years with Snake Eater. They say 3's a crowd, but in the case of Metal Gear Solid, 3 was gameplay perfection. Well, that's a wrap, Visionaries. And I gotta say, I had a lot of fun putting this project together, being able to dig into these lesser discussed topics surrounding Snake Eater, while learning quite a bit about the people who helped shape my taste as a gamer over the years. Like every project, it's been a strange but very rewarding journey. I just want to thank you all for watching, and I hope you know your time, feedback, and support are always appreciated at Redux Visions. I hope this video was informative, but more importantly, entertaining. But my stamina gauge is spent, so while I recover to some Hibino sound therapy, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next. But this has been the document of Metal Gear Solid 3.
Are you lying too?
Who knows? I've been trained to make even the most severe falsehood sound like the honest truth. Weren't you?